Sure. I'll get a chair from that side. Yeah. Yeah. वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत श्रीवासदि गौर हरे कृष्णा कृष्णा कृष्ण हरे हरे। Thank you for coming today. So today we'll discuss on this verse 642, which describes how our inner world works. We'll explain the meaning of each line and then we'll discuss. Indriyani paranya ahu. Para is higher. The senses are higher than ahu. This material world. Things in the material world. That is the sense objects primarily. But so indriyani paranyahu. Indriyani paranyahu. Indriyebhya. Can you see from there? Yeah. So indriyebhya, higher than senses. Param manaha. Higher than senses is the mind. Indriyebhya param manaha. Indriyebhya param manaha. Manasastu, certainly higher than the mind is para. The intelligence is higher than the mind. Indriya manasastu para buddhi. Manasastu para buddhi. Yo buddhi. Beyond this intelligence, parasastu So again, higher certainly is Saha. Saha is that spiritual being, that is the soul. Yo buddhe paratastu saha.
Yo buddhe paratastu saha.
Indriyani paranyahu.
Indriyani paranyahu.
Indriyebhya param manaha.
Indriyebhya param manaha.
Paratastu para buddhe.
Paratastu para buddhe.
Buddhe paratastu saha.
Yo buddhe paratastu saha.
Together one.
Indriyani paranyahu. Indriyebhya param manaha.
This verse, thank you all for coming today. And this verse describes the hierarchy in our inner world. So let's look at what is going on over here. If we consider so we have the senses, Indriyani, and below that we have the sense objects. Now, of course, there are many sense objects and there are multiple senses. But let's put them generally together as one thing, senses. The senses are above the sense objects. Now, why are they considered above? Because generally speaking, the sense objects don't come toward the senses. It's not that, say, we are sitting and watching TV and the fridge walks to us and opens itself and pops the food into our mouth. No, the sense objects are generally inactive. The senses go toward the sense objects. So the senses are active. That's why they're considered higher. So it is active. Now, above the senses is the mind. Now, why is the mind considered above the senses? Because the mind is not limited physically. The senses, if I want to eat some food, only when the food is available, then I can eat. But the mind can fantasize about it. And many times people live in their own mental world, fantasizing about things. Oh, I'll enjoy this, I'll enjoy that. So now this whole analysis is primarily for the purpose of developing self-mastery. So the mind is about the senses in the sense that the mind can go where the senses can't go. The mind can dwell on pleasures which may not be physically available. And conversely, even when some temptation is there right in front of us, if our mind is focused somewhere else, then we may not get distracted. There's some nice, delicious food in front of us, but if we are having a very important meeting, then we are doing some urgent project deadline, we're trying to meet, then we might just forget the food. So the mind is considered higher, reach not limited by or to senses. Its reach can go much further. Now, above the mind is said to be the intelligence. Manasastu para buddhi. Now, why is the intelligence considered above the mind? Because, again, the intelligence can focus the mind. The mind may be restless, it will go here and go there. But with the intelligence, this is what I want to focus. So, it has the capacity for deliberation and focus. This is more important. This is what I want to focus. Now, beyond this, your buddhe paratastu saha. Beyond this is the person, the soul. Now, why is the soul considered higher than all of these? Because the soul is the active principle. The soul is the source of consciousness. Without it, none of this would function. Source of consciousness. So if we consider now these three or these four together, this comprises the embodied soul, or we could say the conditioned soul, the soul in a material body. This is the mechanism by which we function. Now, this hierarchy also serves one point, to convey that there is always the downward pull of gravity. Now, when we have this pull of gravity, if I just leave this pen, it will fall down. So the gravity here is the gravity of material attachments. So by the pull of gravity, the senses are naturally attracted toward the sense objects. For different people, which particular sense object their senses may be attracted to may vary. So for example, if the TV is a sense object and our eyes are the senses. Now, for somebody on TV, they may be attracted to one channel, the sports channel. Somebody may be attracted to movies. Somebody may be attracted to political news, whatever it is. But the sense objects will be different, but based on attachment, the senses move down. And then the whole embodied soul is drawn, even dragged downwards. Where the senses go, the mind follows. And then the intelligence also gets dragged down. Now, in the previous verse, Krishna has said, one of the previous verses he has said, why these three are particularly singled out? Because he has said that all these three can become contaminated. One of the greatest peculiarities of biological life is that if you consider various species exist in the world, now among various species, the humans are considered higher, whether we consider it from a biological perspective, where humans are said to be the pinnacle of evolution, or we consider it from a philosophical perspective, where we say that humans have the higher developed consciousness. Either way, humans are considered higher. And yet, there is a peculiar paradox that no other species harms other members of its own species the same degree as humans. And it's not just, say, people thinking that those are my enemies and I will kill them. That could be due to ideologies. Sometimes there could be wars among lions and bands of animals also. But here we're talking about not just one member of the species harming another member. It is the species harming itself. The tendency for self-destruction. This actually is distinctively present only in human beings. So, for example, all living beings eat. And we enjoy it. All living beings get some pleasure in it. But we humans have, for example, found substances that we can ingest that harm us. So there are addictive substances, with alcohol, there are drugs. Now, no other living being invents substances that will harm themselves. Now, there are examples in nature of a fish being attracted to a bait, of moth being attracted to fire. But then, in those cases, the moth is not intentionally going toward the fire. The moth is just naturally, you could say, biologically programmed to be attracted toward fire, and it dies. But we human beings often do the things that harm us even after knowing that they harm us. And perhaps few things illustrate this as much as suicide. Suicide is they can have slow self-destruction through addiction and other self-destructive activities. And we can have fast self-destruction through suicide. Now, when people become suicidal, now we may say the animals also sometimes herd mentality they have. One sheep goes over a cliff, all other sheep follow. Well, that's true, but those animals are not consciously choosing to end their lives. They can just acting according to the biological programming. So no other species is generally known to commit suicide. No other species is known to, say, ingest harmful substances. Of course, there are some examples of dogs who, when they're contaminated by human association, also start smoking. So, over a period of time, they may also develop taste for it. But in general, this point that that species which is the highest, which is considered pinnacle of evolution, seems to be going against the very basic principle of evolution. The basic principle of evolution is survival of the fittest. And here the fittest is finding means to end its own survival. And not only finding means, developing means, but even subjecting themselves to those very means. So why does this? Why is this self-destructive tendency there? What do you think?
Pleasure seeking. With the intelligence, there are more avenues and processes that humans can access than the lower species. So then, to that, because it's nuanced. When we say it's self-destruction, there is also certain amount of pleasure that people get out of those, and then it becomes an interplay between whether one gives more importance to pleasure-seeking thing during that time rather than the mere survival. Because survival is a basic need, but to enjoy is so then because humans have that evolved consciousness, they want to do it not just survival but beyond that, and in that process, with that risk comes certain aspects that put them in danger.
Good point. Analysis. So I'll just come back to you. So we are trying to understand why self-destruction in humans. It's inhuman, and it seems to be inhuman. Why is it like that? Okay. So what you're saying is that in every activity, you could say there is some pleasure. This is what Krishna later talks about, that there is thrill. And now after that, there'll be danger. It can even lead to destruction. But we may think that the thrill is what I want. And even if it involves some danger, I accept it. So Krishna talks about this in different terms in 1838. He says there are things in which there is nectar in the beginning, but what is there at the end? Poison at the end. Tadagre amrutopamam pariname vishamiva. Tatsukham rajasamputa. So Vishayendriya Sanyoga. So yes. So we may want a thrill and we don't care about the danger. At least initially, when it finally became clear that smoking is actually harmful. Initially, the cigarette companies tried to deny it. Tobacco companies, they tried to get papers published to try to deny it. Even when the evidence was coming up. But when finally it became undeniable and they were forced to put the cigarette smoking is injurious to it. So curiously, for some time after that, cigarette sales increased. Because people thought, I would take that risk because they made it appear cool. They made it appear cool to be a fool. They made it not to be a fool, but to take risks. And women take risks. So take risks. Eventually, now smoking has gone down. It is primarily because of shaming. Sometimes people say you should not shame others. Yeah, that is true, but it's not always true. Sometimes if somebody is doing something bad, then shaming them can stop them from doing that bad. So cigarette smoking has been shamed consistently in society today, at least from the perspective of the consequences of passive smoking. That you smoke, okay, you want to harm yourself, that's up to you. But the smoke from you is going to harm others. How can you do that? You shouldn't be harming others. So there were people who want to smoke, they'll go to secluded areas and smoke. So, but the point is that we may not care for the result. That's one thing. So for the consequence of this, you had some other point.
Yeah, this is kind of building on what you said, but I'll keep it a little vague. I also think it's kind of like the danger of knowing too much. Because once we know too much and we've done too much, we're looking for other things for pleasure. And there comes a point where there's nothing else except for looking for kind of obscure methods of just harming ourselves. Or like I would say, for example, like you said, the programming behind cheap, it's somewhat beneficial in an ignorance of this sense, because they have to stick to one thing, or they don't know certain dangers, or they're just programmed to not have them. But like, because we've kind of explored almost every nook and cranny about what there is to do. There's an option of, hey, we can do this. And I feel like that's almost part of it.
Okay. So let me try to articulate what you're saying. What you're saying is that when we know too much, when we have experienced too much,
Yeah.
then we want to experience something new, even if it is hazardous.
Yes.
And especially if you're told something you should not be doing, then what is that? Forbidden pleasures are always the most fascinating. You tell someone don't go there, the first thing they'll do is as soon as you're not looking, they'll go there. Isn't it? So
forbidden law.
Why
So,
ignorance is-
exhausted options, then seek forbidden. Then after this is what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yes. Thank you. That's a good point.
Also, Marketing.
This one, yes.
I think oftentimes people feel disconnected. Like I know AA will say that alcoholism is a spiritual disease for lack of connection. I think sometimes it runs a lot deeper. A lot of times it runs a lot deeper.
Okay, it could be, but can you explain why that would lead to self-destruction? Disconnection could lead to many different things.
When you feel disconnected, just brings you really low. It brings your consciousness really low, and sometimes like drugs or alcohol is like a way to forget it. You feel so disconnected, so you take something, or you keep yourself intoxicated so that you don't have to feel pain and disconnection.
Coping mechanism.
The disconnection, that lowness, you are giving into lower moods more. And giving
Okay,
into
yeah.
lower.
Disconnection leading to lower modes.
Coping
So you
mechanism.
could say that, let's put it this way, that when we are disconnected, when we feel empty, when our life feels empty or pointless, then at that time, anything will do to try to fill the pointlessness.
You have to be disconnected.
So, yeah, even if it's going to disconnect us more, somehow fill the void. So whatever it takes to fill the void, even if it's harming us, at least for that time I feel good. So it's, again, we could say it's the same point that we seek to avoid the pain of emptiness or disconnection, pointlessness, even if the cost of that avoidance is eventually harmful. That's a good point. Now,
You almost don't even care that it's harmful, or you trick yourself into thinking it's not, like you're in denial. And it's to avoid that.
yeah, I just want to forget it all, no matter what happens afterwards. I once, two people had gone to party and one was drinking way. The person said, I think you should stop drinking. First one, no, I'm doing it. And then the next morning, this first person woke up. And he was the second person said, see, I told you, drinking so much was a bad idea. No, drinking was a great idea. Waking up was a bad idea. So the business want to go into oblivion. Yes, true.
Yeah,
Yeah, Prabhuji, I was saying that your point that most of the pleasurable things that humans have invented, the problem is that they give pleasure immediately, but the possible harms are distant, very late, and don't happen to everybody. So people just think that pleasure is immediate. And if I just take a very common example, today we all are going to heavily eat prasadam. Okay? Prasadam would be made of carbohydrate, fat, salt, and sugar. If you ask a dietitian, they will tell you that all these four things should be avoided. But we will eat happily. But later on, if some of us develop diabetes, then we will start avoiding carbs. Some of us develop hypertension, we will start avoiding salt. But later on. So it all depends. All is, I think, relative. We are seeking happiness now. And maybe we are thinking there might be a price to pay later on. To some of us, not to all. Everybody who smokes doesn't get cancer, but cancer happens mostly to those people who smoke.
Okay, so you could put it this way. There is certain pleasure now and uncertain trouble later.
Yeah, you put it right.
Maybe the trouble will be there, maybe it will not be there. So the mind can always find justification. That this person never smoked and still got cancer.
Yeah.
So why bother? Yeah, some people they just eat a little bit here and there, their stomach gets upset, they get acidity and all that. There are other people who treat their tongue like a conveyor belt. And yet nothing seems to happen to them. They seem fit, they seem slim. So this happens sometimes.
in very rare cases, Prabhuji, I have seen where people don't have a strong vision of destination. So they tend to do multiple things multiple times, and when you don't have a strong direction, emotion tends to be up sometimes, down sometimes, low sometimes, whatever, right? So when you hit on multiple things randomly, some are good and some certainly are bad. Unfortunately, there are so many bad things. That is a self-destruction also.
So you're saying people are purposeless. They don't have any purpose specific to do. So when you're purposeless, then you just become random, and then even self-destruction becomes an option. Okay. They're all good reasons. Which of these apply only to humans? Sorry, you want to say something? We'll come back to that.
No, so similarly, only these things, but with intelligence, since we are at the pinnacle, with intelligence comes the charm of creativity. And that creativity can be on the positive side or negative side. If it's guided, then it's on the positive side, and you can improve on yourself more and more and more, take you to an infinity. But on the other hand, destruction is also, it's like creation always has a destruction. So if the mind, which is creative, can always go into the negative spiral, and it can take you towards harming yourself and destructing yourself.
So we can say misguided creativity. Is that right?
Yeah.
Where we have a higher intelligence.
Yes.
And it can get misguided. That's a good point. Yeah. So with the same intelligence with which we could develop medicine that can save lives, In fact, the same pharma industry which can develop medicines can save life, that pharma industry can develop pain medication, which is meant to be relieving pain, but which is addictive. And then people get hooked to it, and then they just can't escape.
So they're getting pleasure both ways. It could be negative side or the positive side, but mind is enjoying that.
So thank you. These are very good points. Let me put it, we'll try to include this in one framework. That what essentially happens for us is that we are spiritual beings in material bodies. This is from a spiritual perspective, philosophical perspective, Bhagavad Gita will explain, and now we could say this applies for everyone, even a dog, even a mosquito. They are also spiritual beings in material bodies. That is true. However, in the human form, the consciousness is evolved. And this evolved consciousness, what it means is, the evolved consciousness in specifically human body or human form, it implies that we seek more pleasure than what the body can offer. Because our soul is to some extent awakened in everybody. They may not be understanding that this is spiritual awakening. But because the soul is by its nature Ananda, Sat Chit Ananda. The soul is by nature joyful. And the soul is awakened to some extent. And because of that, it seeks pleasure. Now we can say all living beings seek pleasure. Yes, that is true. But we could say that if we consider the soul itself to be like a flashlight. Now, it's like the torch is over here. And say now here the light is coming fully. Here the light is coming very less. Here the light is coming not at all. So in different species, the consciousness is covered to different degrees. So for example, a grass, its consciousness is so much covered that practically for it, the only purpose of its existence is to grow. That's all. Now for humans, our consciousness is developed enough that we seek pleasure, and we seek more pleasure than what the body can naturally offer. The body can offer certain amount of pleasure when we eat, when we live, when we do various things, when we rest, all those are pleasure. When we fight, when we exert our power over others, we get certain pleasure. So ahara, nidra, bhai, these give some pleasure. But we humans seek more pleasure than what the body can actually. And this seeking more pleasure than what the body can actually offer, it's meant for one purpose, but it can go in another purpose. So it's meant for the purpose that we realize the soul. We realize that I'm a soul and I can find happiness thereby at the spiritual. But instead of doing that, what we may do is, we may try to increase bodily pleasure. So we can do it in various ways. Say around us, in the world around us, maybe that attractive things are very less. So our eyes like to see attractive things. Then we can have television where there are, or we can have a computer where we can see all the attractive things. So around us, okay, natural birds are there. They have some music. There's some nice sound, chirping. But we will create music and we'll have the music accessible to us. So we can get more pleasure than what is actually available. Okay, now natural food items have certain taste. Foods can be tasty, but we want them to be more tasty. So we process them. A lot of sugar, a lot of salt, a lot of fat, and we seek more pleasure. So we are meant as souls, we feel that I deserve more pleasure than what my body is giving. But where do I get it? When we try, say for example, somebody wants to eat it. Now, when animals, they're hungry, they can go wild. But once that hunger is over, sometimes a tiger or a lion, if it's hungry, it will pounce on a human being and rip the human being apart. But if it does not pursue a human being to a threat to be a threat, and if it is well fed, it will not attack the human being at all. Okay, it's hungry, its hunger is fulfilled. But we humans, because we seek more pleasure than what the body can offer, naturally, so we may eat even when we are not hungry. We may eat even when the food is actually harmful to us. So there are two distinct things over here. These three are this eating, sleeping, mating, defending. These biological functions, they at one level, they serve two different purposes. The biological functions. Say, let's consider food, for example, eating. It serves two functions. One is survival, and the other is pleasure.
Nourishment also.
Yes, nourishment and survival. So we survive by eating food, we get nourished by it. So now nourishment and pleasure, both are there. But because we feel that I am entitled to more pleasure than what my body can give me, or what my body naturally gives me. So this is should both come naturally. But like you said earlier, because of this, the pleasure becomes more important than survival. And when that happens, why does this happen? Because we feel we are entitled to more pleasure. So we put this another way, that this particular, the nature of our physical situation is meant to prompt us to seek something more than sense pleasure. Yeah, our senses will offer us some pleasure, but it is limited. And we should seek something more than sense pleasure. That is what our dormant or latent spirituality points us to. But instead, what we may end up doing is we seek some more sense pleasure. Not something more than sense pleasure, but seek some more sense pleasure. And when this happens, that sense pleasure, even if it is at the cost of harming us, even if it is the cost of destroying us, still we keep pursuing it. Now, sense pleasure, there is some pleasure in it. But when that pleasure itself becomes the purpose of our existence, then sense pleasure often follows what we can call as the law of diminishing returns. So every sense pleasure initially is great. Like suppose we come to a program and say there is gulab jamun. What is gulab jamun? Not just delicious, it's irresistible. After we eat one, yeah, it's still desirable. Then after that, if you eat 5, if you eat 10 gulab jamuns, and somebody afterwards, please take one. Okay, then
After
no,
20.
I don't want it. Okay.
After 20.
20 is the meter.
20. Okay.
Is for diabetes.
Okay. I take one more. Okay. But after some time, at the end of it, the same pleasure becomes intolerable. If somebody stuffed themselves with food, then they offer one more, no, bring it from, I can't throw up now. So the same pleasure which is irresistible can become intolerable. That happens in the immediate course. Like somebody drinks and drinks and drinks, and after that, it's too much again. But that is the immediate experience at the surface. That is our immediate experience at the level of our conscious awareness. But at the subconscious level, what happens is our mind, the memory that is formed, the memory or the impression that is formed of that incident is highly distorted. This is what we remember, and this is what we forget. So, next time, if a gulab jamun is offered, yeah, it is delicious, I want it. But this, we forget. That, oh, I ate too much of this, too much of that. So why does it work like that? Again, because we believe that pleasure is our right. And it is indeed. But how do we find it? That is the question. So going back to our starting diagram now. Let's look at some of the points over here. Yeah, so now again, another thing that happens with this pleasure is when we get a lot of pleasure, we have lots of experiences of pleasure. We try this and we try that and we try that and try that and try that. And we try after some everything that is there to be tried. And what do I do after that? And somebody will say nobody can try everything. Well, that's true. Nobody can eat every single food item that is there in the world. But after some time, it's just that unless somebody is a connoisseur of food, if somebody is just eating like a glutton, then they cannot really taste the refined taste of food. It's very gross taste. It just becomes something which no longer satisfies. And then we gravitate towards self-destruction. So we humans, this very tendency that we seek pleasure, we want pleasure, and we want more pleasure than what our body can offer. That can become the cause of the destruction of the body. Because the body at one level is the vehicle for pleasure for us. But it's like I have a car, and the car's safe limit for running is say 80 miles per hour. But I want to drive at 300 miles per hour. And I believe that is the only time I really enjoy. So then if I start driving an 80-mile car at 300-mile speed, after some time, the car will be there, nor I will be there. So that is what is essentially happening for us. We want more pleasure than what the body can offer. And that means that we are 80-mile car, 300 mile speed. It leads to destruction. We seek more pleasure in what the body wants. So now, sometime or the other, when we are seeking pleasure and we stop getting pleasure, at that time there are two options. One is we look upward or we look sideward, or we can look downward also. We look upward or we look anywhere else. We look upward means, is there any pleasure beyond physical pleasure? Is there any pleasure beyond material pleasure? Or we look like, okay, some other alternative here, some other there. We keep looking for alternatives. But this does not mean that material pleasure itself is bad or wrong. The point is that if material pleasure itself is the sole purpose of our life, Kamopabhoga parama etavad nishchita. It's not that we can't eat good food. It's not that we can't hear good music. We can. But if eating good food is the sole purpose of someone's life, then that itself will become the cause of their destruction. So this verse, if you go back to the diagram over here, our material attachments are formed when we start seeking pleasure to certain objects and they start dragging us down. So Krishna later will explain that he's right now not introduced Bhakti Yoga. He's at this particular point in the Bhagavad Gita, he's primarily talking about Karma Yoga. But later on, when he will introduce Bhakti Yoga, he will tell that beyond this is the super soul. Super soul is none other than Krishna himself. And when the soul becomes connected with Krishna, this connection is bhakti. The bhakti that culminates in prema. Krishna is unlimited and he is the source of unlimited happiness. And our developed human consciousness is meant for us to search Hatha Brahmacharya. Is there some higher source of happiness? Is there something more? Is there something bigger? And after that searching, when we find Krishna, we become absorbed in Krishna. That is the time when we experience unlimited happiness. And while we are doing that, that is a very evolved stage. Till that happens, now the soul is an embodied condition, means the soul is also connected with the intelligence. The soul is functioning through the intelligence, through the mind, through the senses, and the consciousness is going outward. So till that happens, till the bhakti connection has been established, what Krishna will say is that we use our various faculties to connect with Krishna. So we use our buddhi to connect with Krishna. We use our mana to connect with Krishna. We use our senses to connect with Krishna. So through all these, we establish a connection. So connecting with Krishna through our buddhi, that is essentially smaran. Smaran is remembrance. We use our intelligence to remember the philosophy. We use our intelligence to remember the pastimes. Connecting with our senses is seva. We use our various senses to serve Krishna. Then connecting our mind with Krishna is realization. It is sakshatkar. Our mind is the most difficult to connect with Krishna. The mind, the senses can connect with Krishna. Anybody can come and they come to a temple and do some seva, do some garland, serve some food, cook some food. That is relatively easy to do. That's the first step. Then you study the philosophy, you understand the philosophy. Yeah, this sort of makes sense. Then what happens is that's the time when we start engaging our intelligence. Okay, I should remember that there's a higher purpose to my life. That's the smaran. The smaran, ultimately, when we talk about Krishna, remembering Krishna, it just doesn't just mean remembering this pastime and remembering that pastime. That's wonderful. But remembering Krishna means that remembering that Krishna is the highest purpose of life. When, say, we are working at a job, say if our family is in one city and we are in another city. We are working in that city. Now we are working over there. But while we are working there, we are remembering, I'm doing this for my family. So remembrance can mean many things, but at a most practical level, remembrance of Krishna. Remembrance in general can mean remembrance of purpose. So remembrance of Krishna means remembrance of our purpose to serve Krishna. So this is what will lead me to happiness. This is what will lead to me to my highest gain. Now, when we do this, so Krishna talks basically about to deal with the mind, two-pronged approach. The mind is extremely restless. So there's a bottom-up approach and there's a top-down approach. The bottom-up approach is engage the senses. Engage the senses in service. The top-down approaches convince the intelligence. And by this two approach, so the mind in one sense is in between, and above is the intelligence, below are the senses. So the bottom of approach is service, engage the senses. The top-down approach is remembrance, is philosophical conviction. By this, our mind may want to go here and there, but we remind ourselves of it. And by this, gradually, the mind will get realization. So I'll talk about what is realization, and then we'll open for questions. So, realization, sakshatkar, it can mean many different things. But realization at one level means that so that which is a reality we accept it to be a reality. I got this realization. That means, say for example, we may say, oh, wealth does not bring happiness. Okay, maybe only wealthy people say this. Well, yeah, you can say if somebody is below the poverty line, wealth does correspond with happiness. If I don't have food to eat and I get some money while you eat some food, then wealth does bring happiness. But suppose we meet a fabulously wealthy person. The person is living in a mansion, a fleet of cars outside. And then at that time, this person must be very happy. And we go in and we talk to that person, and then especially if say we are a spiritual minded and we are having a spiritual conversation with them, that person may open up and they say, actually, my wife died of a painful cancer 5 years ago, and my son is at a drug rehab center. My daughter married against my will, and she's just waiting. Everybody around me is just waiting for me to die so that they'll get all the money. And they all want me. And the only time they talk with me is that the time I'll put their name in my will. Wherever there is a will,
You want my name to be there.
wherever there is a will, there are many willing relatives. What happens at the time is, wealth has not made this person happy. Now, of course, our mind is so devious. But the mind is saying, hey, this person is really unhappy. Maybe I should become a friend and this person will put my name in the will. We may think like that also. But the point is that sometimes we get this realization. So, that which is a reality, when we experience it to be a reality, that is realization.
So in this example, that's not realization.
I'll come to that. I'm not saying that that is a realization. That could lead to a realization. I'll explain how it works. See? Broadly, we have three sources of knowledge. Right? So there is, let's put it this way, intelligence, the mind, and the senses. So with the senses, we get pratyaksha. We have sensory perception. Generally, with the intelligence, we understand shabda. We understand scripture. With the mind, we do anuman. Now, sometimes anuman is talked about negatively, but anuman is not just guesswork. It can be inference. But it's important to understand that all three are valid ways of acquiring knowledge.
And Anuman is not guesswork. Anuman is through pratyaksha. You see a lot of chappal outside. With that chappal, I inferred that there are people in this room. Right?
Yeah.
So Anumana is always taking the data from pratyaksha and then we analyzing it, right?
Yes, anuman is inference that comes from a pratyaksha. Now,
Also from Shabda. Because
So let's take one thing at a time. So Anuman's inference, now that inference could be right and inference could be wrong. So I see water outside when I wake up in the morning, it must have rained yesterday. That's the inference. It could be that it has rained yesterday. It could be that maybe some water pipe line broke down and that's why water has flooded. Maybe somebody was gardening and while putting the water, the water sprinkled over to the pathway.
Right.
So inference could be right or wrong. So inference can arise from perception. Now, inference can also be used to understand Shabda. So in general, these three branches of knowledge are all valid. They're not branches. Three sources of knowledge, they have their own validity. So when we use the word realization, especially in a spiritual sense, so what exactly happens is the intelligence is informed by scripture that this is a reality. Say, for example, the idea that the wealth is not a source of money, or money alone can make you happy. That is a reality. Now, with our senses, when we also experience that reality, that which is told to be a reality, with our senses also we experience that to be a reality. Now, after we do that, that alone does not make a realization. Then, when the mind links these two, when we do inference that links, the linking inference. Okay, this is what I was told, this is what I've experienced.
That can be called contemplation also. Vidithyasana, right?
So now, when this linking happens, that linking gives us not just a personal experience, but an experience that is placed in a bigger context. Now, after this experience comes, after that linking is done, the mind has to decide whether I accept that this is the reality or this is the exception to the reality. Oh, this person is not happy, like some of you earlier said. Okay, sometimes some people, they smoke but they don't get cancer. So I could say, oh, this person smoked and got cancer. Is that the norm or is that the exception? That is a decision that the mind makes. Now, when that decision is made, if we accept that this is not the norm, this is not the exception, this is the norm, and the mind accepts it, when it sinks into the mind. See, when the intelligence accepts it, that is conviction. But when the mind accepts it, that is realization. For the mind is much, much more restless than the intelligence. So, for example, the intelligence accepts that, okay, eating red meat, it's still harmful. I've read this study, I've read that study, okay. Maybe it will cause some heart disease. But then suppose somebody gets a heart attack. They somehow survive the heart attack. The doctor says, you have to stop it. No questions. So they got the experience and then the mind accepted it. So now, depending on the conditioning in the mind may accept it immediately, the mind may not accept it immediately. But the point is that which is a reality in the sense that is told by scripture, and that which we experience as a reality. But after hearing from scripture, after experiencing it ourselves, when we accept it, that acceptance is realization. So beyond the contemplation is where we establish the link. But even after establishing the link, so is this the reality or is this the norm or is this the exception? When I accept it, this is the norm. This is what happens. So now we may say, okay, but there are exceptions, aren't there? Yes, the exceptions are there. Generally speaking, the kind of food we eat affects our health. But there is a buffer that may be created for some people by their past karma. It's like normally if a person spends money, then they spend money a lot, they'll become bankrupt. But if a person has inherited a huge amount of money, then they can spend money and they don't seem to be becoming bankrupt. Of course, the amount of money that they have is not infinite. And they're indiscriminately spending money, they will become bankrupt. But that bank balance can create a buffer between their actions and their consequences. So similarly, sometimes a past karmic balance, a positive past karmic balance, can create a buffer between our actions and our consequences, the consequences of those actions. It's like a person goes higher and somebody falls from say 10 feet, there's a slight injury. Somebody falls from one store or from second level, a little bigger injury. Somebody falls from the 10th level, much bigger injury. Somebody jumps out of a helicopter far high in the sky. There'll be huge, there'll be destruction. But
Not immediately.
not immediately. If they don't look down, so the higher you go, the harder you will fall, but it may take longer. So sometimes the exceptions, they don't disprove the rule. The exceptions are there, and there's explanation for the exception also. But the mind can rationalize. So that is what we want to avoid. And now, to the extent we accept this. All of you heard this word rationalize, isn't it? What does rationalize mean?
To provide a reason.
Yes, but it's true, but it's not that innocent.
To justify something,
Justify.
whether it's good or bad.
Yeah, it's rationalize means to
There
give.
has to be a substance, the rational too.
No, that is different. Rational, that is one meaning, but generally the word rationalize means to give a more acceptable reason for a less acceptable action.
Okay, speaking.
Sorry? That's different.
Yeah.
No. For example, somebody smoking. Why are you smoking? The room was cold. I wanted to heat the room for you. Now that certainly was not the reason why you smoked. That might be something that happened. So when we rationalize, what we do is we tell rational lies.
Karna's commitment.
Yeah, rationalize. Karna's commitment. That's a good example. So you tell rationalize. So sometimes our mind can rationalize and tell rationalize. Okay, that's an exception. But when the mind accepts, that is a realization. So for us, when we are trying to practice bhakti right now, so we hear the philosophy, we try to understand the philosophy, we try to remember some philosophical points, and we try to do some service. So, but we are in one sense using that two-pronged approach. So from, again, this two-pronged approach, you could put the same way. With the intelligence, we hear the reality. With the senses, we also experience the reality. Say, for example, if we like to eat food, I don't like sweet food. But if we come to a temple and we serve the shop, and we start experiencing in serving food, I experience some joy. That joy is as good as, or maybe better than eating the food myself. So if you experience that, then what happens? Hey, maybe there's something higher. Intelligence tells us that serving Krishna is greatest. So I like to sing. Now I may go to a party and sing some Bollywood songs. And I have a singing voice. I come to the temple and sing kirtans for Krishna. And at one level, both is singing. But after some time, when I start experiencing that, singing for Krishna gives some special joy. It's not there. Other joy, other singing. So that combination of scriptural testimony, which is accepted by intelligence, and the experience that we have got by engaging our senses, that combination gives us realization. And slowly, when the mind accepts, that's when we will redirect. Krishna in the next verse will say, Evam buddhe param buddha samsthabhya atmanam atman. You, in this way, understanding with your intelligence that you are a spiritual being, situate yourself on the spiritual platform. And once you situate yourself on the spiritual platform, by that, Jahi Shatrum Mahabahu Kam. That you conquer this great enemy. That is, Krishna uses the word kama, it refers not just to lust, it refers in general to self-destructive desire. That will be. So this is the way to self-transformation, to fulfilling our longing for happiness is by redirecting our search for happiness towards. This does not mean denying our senses. If we have our abilities with the senses, we use those abilities. We have certain talents, certain efficiencies, certain interests. We link them with Krishna in a mode of service, and thus we can move towards spiritual happiness. So a devotee may be an engineer, a devotee may be a doctor, a devotee may be a musician, a devotee may be an author. That means that's their senses, mind, a devotee might be a businessman, their senses, mind, intelligence are geared to function a particular way. And we do that. So it's like the soul is here. Now the soul in this world plays many different roles. You may be parent, you may be businessman, you may be citizens. The soul, this could be a relational role. You could be a parent. You could be you have a particular profession. You be a student. You may belong to a particular nation. So what we do is we use all our roles in a mood of service to Krishna. So I'm a parent in Krishna's service. I'm an engineer or businessman in Krishna's service. I'm an Indian citizen or American citizen in Krishna's service. So when we have this mood, then that seva engages our entire life. Seva is not just coming to the temple and doing some service. Yes, that is definitely there. But seva also means doing the natural activity that our senses are trained for in a mood of service to Krishna. And in that way, we will fulfill the potential that we have materially while also realizing our spiritual potential. Our material potential is we all have certain talent which make some contribution in the world. Our spiritual potential is that we can develop love for Krishna and we can become absorbed in Krishna. And so the material potential and the spiritual potential both can be fulfilled through bhakti. Bhakti is not just about fulfilling our spiritual potential. Krishna did not tell Arjuna to renounce the world and go to the forest and become absorbed. Krishna said, you have trained as an archer, you work as an archer. So bhakti enables us, even the senses, if the senses become too wild and unregulated, then the material potential cannot be fulfilled. Person might be a very good singer, but if that singer becomes famous and celebrated and they start partying and they start drinking and they start smoking and then they lose their throat. And that potential can't be fulfilled. So when there's a higher purpose, not only the higher purpose of serving Krishna can fulfill our spiritual potential, but also our material potential. And that is the way to lasting happiness. So I'll summarize. I talked about the inner hierarchy, extending from the senses up to the sense objects rather, and then to the soul. We understood the hierarchy, and then based on that, we look at this hierarchy, but why self-destruction in humans? So there are various reasons. Fundamentally, it boils down to we want more pleasure than what the body can offer. And that becomes a problem for us. Then body's capacity. So we try to extend the body's capacity, but in extending the body's capacity, we end up harming the body. So the idea is we seek not just more sense pleasure, but seek something more than sense pleasure. And that is The pleasure of connection with Krishna. We are parts of Krishna, and when we connect with Krishna, there is pleasure. And that connection happens at multiple levels. The senses we connect through, you remember? Seva. The intelligence through Smaran. The intelligence is connected to Krishna through remembrance. You remember life's purpose, remember Krishna. And the mind is connected through realization, sakshatkar. And then, lastly, we discuss what is realization. Realization is the mind accepting what the intelligence and the senses have given. Or that which is we have learned to be a reality, we experience it to be a reality, and then we accept it. Not as a norm, but not as the exception, but as the norm. And this happens, then we all can become wholeheartedly connected with Krishna. And then all our aspects of our life, if we connect with Krishna, this realization will lead to material and spiritual potential being fulfilled. So any questions or comments?
That last point you said about material spiritual potential, sometimes they don't go hand in hand. Sometimes you have to make choices that one thing goes against the other in terms of, say, time commitment or going full-heartedly certain services or not doing, or to be able to come to a program or not. So they're at the tussle many times. And then we don't know how to find the balance where which one ultimately would lead to a more longer lasting or profound service to Krishna. And that decision making becomes tough.
A good point, right? Sometimes the material and spiritual potentials fulfillment can pull against each other. Well, yes, that's possible. I think that also depends on certain factors. When we talk about material potential, most people, for them, their work is just a job. It's not really a passion. So, okay, I have to earn a living in this job, this particular area, you make some good returns, good social, financial security, good social position. So, if that is the case, the work can be a job or the work can be a passion. Here, I'm not using passion in the sense of Prajoguna. I'm using passion in the sense that something which consumes them, something which absorbs them, something that is their natural inclination. So, generally, if it's a passion, then they have talent in them. They have capacity in them. So, it depends. So, you see, when Arjuna, there was a test, Drona got all his students, and he asked them, shoot that effigy of a bird, and not just the bird, but the eye of the bird. So he asked various students, what do you see? Say, okay, we see the tree, we see the leaves, we see the sky. And what did Arjuna say?
Just the eye.
I see only the eye of the bird. See, it's interesting. Arjuna did not say, I see Krishna. Krishna said, the Bhagavad, my devotee sees me everywhere. Yomam Pashit Sarvat. And why did Arjuna see Krishna? Well, Arjuna saw Krishna in the sense that becoming good in this field is the way I'll be able to serve Krishna. So, the point is that for us, if a particular area is an area of passion for us, again, passion in the positive sense of the word, then that means that Krishna wants us to serve in that area. Now, we may say that success requires complete focus, no distractions. Well, it's not that simple. Yes, definitely, focus is required. But one of the biggest challenges for people who become successful and who have not found a culture of balance, that they may rise to the top in one field, but if they neglected their relationship, if they neglected their health, they have neglected their mental balance, they will collapse. They will be like a rocket that goes up and then crashes down. So yes, there can be balance and focus both. It's difficult, But you could also put it this way that actually balance is what helps us to exist. So when Narad Muni comes to meet Yudhishthira Maharaj after he has been coronated as a king, so he says three things. He says dharma, artha, and kama. So virtue, pleasure, and profit. So he says, O king, are you pursuing these three in balance? So virtue, that is dharma. Then there is profit. Profit is artha. And then there is pleasure. Now again, calm does not just mean sensual or sexual pleasure. It means the fulfillment of desire. So he says, are you pursuing all these three in balance? Do not pursue virtue at the cost of profit and pleasure. Do not pursue profit at the cost of virtue and pleasure. Do not pursue pleasure at the cost of virtue. So all these three are important. So for us, bhakti includes all these. So for example, for us, dharma is the temple. Profit is our workplace, our office. And pleasure is our home. So all these three are to be seen as means of serving Krishna. Krishna doesn't just exist in the temple. Of course, you could say Krishna exists prominently in the temple. Krishna is present at our home also. So somebody can say, oh, my family is also devotee, so I don't need devotee association because I'm also with my family. Well, yes and no. It's wonderful if our family is devotee. But the devotional relationship is not the primary relationship. It's a functional relationship. And sometimes the functional aspect can take most of our life. So we need devotee association. So the bhakti, the Bhagavad Gita explains, has two broad forms. So we have what you can call as, so this is the material level and the spiritual level. So at one level, bhakti is meant for us to rise from material level of consciousness to spiritual level of consciousness. To rise from material level of reality to spiritual level of reality. So this is bhakti. However, this is one form of bhakti. This can be called as immersive bhakti. Krishna talks about 12.8. And then there is another form of bhakti where we turn to the world in a mood of service to Krishna. You can call this as inclusive bhakti. So, Jiva Goswami calls this as Kevala Bhakti and he says Aropa Siddha Bhakti. So, the different words can be used for it. But the point is that we are functioning in this world, we are living in the world, and we have to function in the world. So to function in the world means we have to be responsible. So Krishna talks about this in 12.10 that mat karma paramo. So both are to be done. And in the ideal situation, both of these forms of bhakti, they nourish each other. The immersive bhakti, when we turn away from the world to focus on Krishna, when we do our sadhana, when we come to satsang, we do our puja, that actually gives us conviction that my existence has meaning and purpose. I'm not just all alone in this world struggling to survive or to make a mark. We are parts of a bigger reality. And every one of us has a purpose for our existence. So our immersive bhakti, it in one sense energizes our inclusive bhakti. It's not just by random that I'm in this family or this country or in this world. Yes, it might be because of my karma, but it is also my karma is working under Krishna's plan. So we do our inclusive bhakti with greater knowledge. And there are inclusive bhakti when we function in the world in the mood of service to Krishna. For example, we do our chanting nicely, and then we go and do our job. We'll find that we are calmer, we are clearer, we are cooler, and then function better. Hey, this works. This helps. So then our inclusive bhakti will inspire our immersive. Right? Actually, I can function better in the world when I'm practicing. Sometimes we may have a very negative attitude toward the world. This world is to call and get out of it. Well, yes and no. This world is a place of distress. What it means is that we don't make this world our ultimate destination. The same Krishna who says this world is Dukkhalaya, he descends to the Dukkhalaya to establish Dharma, to establish order in the world. So this world and our role in the world is also important. So exact balance can vary. And yes, sometimes you pull in this direction, sometimes you pull in that direction. But that can happen not just in the material spiritual domain, it can happen in the spiritual domain also. Isn't it? So I want to do this service, I want to do that service. Both are services. So that tension is going to be there because we are finite beings. And we have to use our intelligence to navigate that tension. Thank you. Yes, please.
We always keep hearing about this sixth sense or gut feeling. And we know that we have mind, intelligence, and ego and senses. Where does the gut feeling come from?
So where does the gut feeling come from? Where does the gut feeling or sixth sense come from? It's very difficult to see. So intuition, we can use the word. So in general, with respect to this, rather than focusing on the source, we focus on the effect. Not where did it come from, but where will it take? When we say, I don't know. Well, yes and no. We can look at our own past experience. Say, sometimes in our past, some of us have certain innate abilities. For example, if somebody comes to a home and they have very good sense of, say, interior decoration. They come to a home and they look around and say, you move this picture here, you move the sofa here, and you put this curtain of this color, you look much better. And they figure that in 5 minutes, and somebody has stayed in their house for 5 months and they couldn't figure it out. So now, is that gut feeling? Well, not exactly. It's some voice coming from inside.
Experience.
I won't necessarily jump to that conclusion. It could also be our trained instincts, it could be our innate talent, whatever it is. So rather than claiming, it's very dangerous to say, it is a super soul telling you should rearrange your house like this. No, it's a bit presumptuous. When I think America declared a war on Iraq, the president said, God has told me to attack it. Well, okay.
I think there was a church where one of the priests said, God is being bad to you all because you haven't donated enough to us.
God is?
God's not happy with everyone because you haven't donated enough to the church.
Oh yeah, God is not happy with you because you are saying this now.
But Prabhuji, my grandmother, before she passed away, she was in a different town. Okay, but she came back to our home. She's like, you know what? I think I might not live. She was a healthy lady, and she changed her reservation, and she came home, and she took shower. She went into DT room, took some, and she was bleeding, and she passed it. I felt all these years long that she was very sensitive to the surroundings and a nice person. Again, the good samskaras and karma has to be there, that whole portion. I'm not denying that fact. But I felt like she was always so sensitive around her and what's going on. So that's the reason she was tapped into the nature. When the nature call was coming for her, I felt she was resonance bolte na Prabhuji. She got. I totally wrong.
Bhaktivinoda Thakur also said that his grandfather, he writes in his autobiography, his grandfather was like that. He was a great Devi Bhakta. He was told, at this point I am going to die. And when he came there, he completed puja and he sat down on his bed. Outside, people have outdoor beds in their villages. Sat down on that bed in a prayerful mode, and he just left his body. So yes, see, we all have varying degrees of awareness. And sometimes we think of, for some people, even the sensory awareness, their sensory awareness can seem mystical to others. Like some people just eat one sample of food and they can tell all the ingredients that are there in the food. Hey, how do you figure that out? So for somebody else, it might seem like almost mystical. So these various abilities they are matters of degree. It's not necessarily a matter of different category. Now, some may be so rare that it might appear to be a different category. Now, exactly how awareness happens, to what extent is it just sensory awareness? It's senses plus mind plus intelligence plus the soul plus the super soul, all of them combined together. So for some people, they have a special awareness. So that's why I said, how do we know whether I have a special awareness? We look at the in the past, this kind of, when this voice said it, it was not. So it's a reasonable inference to say it's likely to be right. Maybe this voice should be trusted. Sometimes it may be that it's our anxiety acting out. They should not go there. So if we find that we decided not to go, that didn't work out. I mean, nothing happened. Okay, then. So don't worry too much about where it is coming from. Focus on where it is taking us. Remember voice. Okay. So the last question.
So the mind,
Books.
so the soul lives somewhere in the heart, and then where does the mind live? Mind and intelligence would be. They are subtle elements, and then they live within the body. Or sometimes I feel like in Brahma Samhita there is this universe is covered by earth, water, all the five elements, and then the mind, intelligence, and ego all below.
Yeah, good question. So where do the mind, intelligence, mind, and all of them exist? Well, in Sankhya, to whatever extent I have studied, Sankhya is the branch of Vedic philosophy which analyzes material existence. And the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam both are drawn from Sankhya. So Sankhya seems to say that all the elements, they are distributed. It's like earth. It is not distributed in one particular place in the body. Earth is distributed throughout the body. Water is distributed throughout the body.
What is it?
Water. Bhumi, Rapo, Nalo, Vayu. Just as earth, water, they're all distributed throughout the body. Similarly, mind, intelligence, and ego are also distributed throughout the body. So, is it that now for depiction purposes, we may say, okay, this is soul, around it is the subtle body, around it is the gross body. So that's fine, as far as depiction is concerned.
And when we die also, those two circles will be.
Exactly. So the mind, intelligence, and ego, another way of looking at it is that the mind, intelligence, and ego, they are subtle body. So you could say these are like subtle body is like software. This is the body, gross body to be like the hardware. Then the gross body is the hardware, the subtle body is the software. If considered to be like a software, then that means that actually speaking, even when we say that okay, the software is the pen drive. I have pen drive. Now, okay, software is in the pen drive. But see, the pen drive is not the software. And that software could be in somewhere else also. The software is not bound to the pen drive. Software could be in our device also, it could be in A drive, B drive, it could be in our primary device, it could be in our additional storage. So like that, so the subtler elements, they are not as bound to particular locations as the grosser elements. For example, liquid. The liquid can't stay very long in our mouth. It has to go in our tongue. Liquid can't stay very long in our ears. Liquid will be in the bloodstream. If air stays too much in our nose or mouth or our alimentary canal, then that leads to some disruption. Air is there, but it is primarily respiratory. So like that, these grosser elements are, while they are also distributed, but they are concentrated in particular areas. The subtler elements are much more distributed. They are not bound to particular locations. So that's why sometimes when we use the word, are you out of your mind? And these are normal uses. Have you lost your mind? When the rhetorical uses, what they mean is that in general, always say, where is your mind? Get your mind back. Does that mean the mind has literally gone away? It doesn't matter whether the mind has literally gone away or only our awareness has gone away. For all practical purposes, we are not able to focus. So the physical location of the subtle elements does not matter too much for their functioning or non-functioning. So the overall what I understood is that they are local, they are not localized, they are distributed.
So they are all just circle in the universe.
No. Our mind pervades our body. Our mind, our intelligence, our ego, they pervade our body. Mind that happens for mind, that happens for yours. The mind is not pervading your body. And your mind is not pervading mine. Because that can also happen sometimes. That out of body experiences and stuff like that. But generally, even out of body experiences, persons perceive themselves from outside the body. They don't perceive themselves as from inside somebody else. That happens only when somebody has ghosts and there's possession by ghosts. That's the exception. Generally, the mind and the subtle body is distributed throughout the body. Thank you very much. The Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Prabhupada ki jai. Gaurvati ki jai.
Grace Caitanya Charan Prabhu ki jai.
Mindfulness book. Even one copy will be. Yeah. Yeah. You have it?
I have of them in my heart.
So I've written some 27 books, out of which we have a few over here. So much of what I spoke on the Bhagavad Gita, especially today, is from this book. This is Bhagavad Gita Insights. This is 100 articles explain the Bhagavad Gita from a rational perspective. So each article is just two pages with some diagrams and some one sentence summary explaining the article. This follows the mode of Baldev Vidya Bhushan. It's Gita Bhushan commentary that he takes a very rational approach to the Bhagavad Gita. This is the Bhagavad Gita from a relational perspective. Again, 100 articles, which focuses on how the Gita is not just philosophy, but it's a message of love. The dynamics of loving relationship between Krishna and Arjuna, and how that loving relationship is expressed and enhanced and enriched through the philosophy message of the Bhagavad Gita. It's explained in this book. If you want to know how Bhagavad Gita can nourish your bhakti, this is the relishing Bhagavad Gita. This follows Vishwanath Chakravarti's mood in commenting on it. Can explain the Gita. And now, this is the Gita from an applicational perspective. This is 365 reflections for daily mindfulness. There's about one page each article, and there are about 25-30 pages of table of contents. So each article is based on one particular verse of the Gita, and there are sections like how to deal with temptations, or how to face adversity with spirituality, how to not be ritualistic in our practices, how to be sensitive in our speech, how to be less judgmental in our dealings. So there are about 50-60 articles on each of these topics, various areas in which you can apply with our practical life. That's this book. Now, this is specifically Bhagavad Gita for managing the mind. 64 articles for mind management. Each of them is again 2 pages with some practical diagram explaining themselves. And then we have this I did not announce yesterday. This is a calendar with 365 quotes inspired by the Bhagavad Gita. So be mindful, or your mind will make you a fool. So we may have to live with pain, but we don't have to live in pain. Those who open their mouth without opening their mind end up eating their words. So these are all quotes inspired by different verses from the Bhagavad Gita. It's a very accessible way to share spirituality with your colleagues, friends who may not be interested in reading books. They can just read a quote. And if they Google the quote, it will take you to gitadaily.com, my website. There's an article explaining this. But all these books are, right now we have some of them available, but they are all available in set concession, and we have several copies in New Vrindavan from where we can get them. And also from India also they can come within 10 days. If any of you want some copies, please tell Labru, we'll have it. Like, I'm available also for signing in case you want. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.